The Armored Assault Tank was one of the CIS's most heavily used vehicles, a mainstay of invasion armies and defense forces alike. It's a fairly iconic tank with a simple but sleek design and a whole lot of guns. But was it any good, you may ask? As a matter of fact, it absolutely was. The AAT was an incredibly effective war machine, and there's a reason the Confederacy used it so often. In fact, it pretty much carried separatist ground forces. In this video, we're going to be taking a look at the AAT and what made it so amazing.
Attention, Sergeant on deck!
The Armored Assault Tank was designed by Bactoid Armor Workshop for the Trade Federation Droid Army, shortly prior to the Battle of Naboo. Together with three other Bactoid vehicles, the STAP, the MTT, and the PAC, the AAT was intended to serve as the Droid Army's armored complement. While the STAP filled the role of a speeder and/or recon vehicle, and the other two craft served as troop transports, the AAT was a dedicated battle tank. It was designed to be able to lead the charge in ground battles, something that it ended up doing quite well. The AAT was a repulsor lift vehicle, kept aloft by heavy-duty repulsor discs and coils located in the armored nose of the craft. Due to its nature as a repulsor craft, the AAT was usable across a wide variety of terrain. Though its large front end meant that the tank needed a decent amount of space to be able to maneuver in. AATs weren't the fastest repulsor tanks out there, but with a top speed of 55 km per hour, they were far from sluggish. Of course, speed wasn't really something the designers at Bactoid were all that concerned about when it came to designing this tank. After all, they were looking to make a resilient, heavy-hitting frontline war machine, not a land speeder. As with the MTT, another Bactoid vehicle, the AAT had its power and communication systems located at the rear of the craft for protection. The tank was powered by a 4-chambered multi-reactor onboard power plant, which was located just above the main hatch at the back of the craft. Additionally, the AAT featured a pair of secondary power generators located on either side of the main hatch, which primarily supplied power to the shovel-like lower part of the tank. Communication systems, meanwhile, were located at the back of the tank's top turret near the tank's battlefield sensors. The Armored Assault Tank was piloted by a crew of 4, a tank commander, a pilot, and 2 gunners. Originally, the crew roles on the AAT were filled by OOM battle droid commanders, OOM droid pilots, and B-1 battle droids respectively. But by the time of the Clone Wars, the Confederacy had developed dedicated AAT driver droids, which were distinguished by their green armor markings. Organic crews were also able to operate AATs, and oftentimes organic commanders or tactical droids would claim the top turret of a tank to oversee the progress of a battle from. The tank's crew accessed the craft by means of an armored ramp located at the back. The pilot and the gunners were seated in the craft's main cabin. The pilot sat front and center and had control of maneuvering and presumably the tank's anti-personnel guns. AAT pilots relied on cameras and terrain sensors to pilot their craft. But if these systems failed, the main cabin did feature an armored hatch that could be opened for the pilot to see out of. The 2 gunners sat on either side of the pilot, operating the tank's secondary laser cannons and its artillery. The tank commander, on the other hand, sat alone in an armored turret located on the top of the tank. The commander could sit safely inside the turret and use cameras and terrain sensors for targeting purposes, or he could open a hatch on the turret's top to get a better view of the battlefield. Most organic AAT commanders preferred to keep the hatch open, despite the safety risk it posed. On either side of the main cabin's exterior, there were 3 handholds intended for use by battle droids, which allowed the AAT to carry 6 passengers as well as its crew of 4. As you might expect from its name, the Armored Assault Tank was very heavily armored, especially at the front. The shovel-shaped nose of the craft was pretty much solid armor in many places, which allowed the AAT to ram through reinforced walls with impunity. Its armor wasn't perfect, and a single direct hit from any sort of artillery was usually enough to blow right through it, but it worked well enough. For this reason, AATs usually led the charge when the droid army deployed in force, as it was capable of soaking up a lot more damage than the flimsy B-1 battle droids it was usually deployed alongside. The AAT's primary weapon was its heavy laser cannon, which was mounted on the turret at the top of the craft. The tank commander personally managed the primary cannon, which was powerful enough to be able to punch a hole in even the heavy armor of an AT-TE. The AAT also featured secondary and tertiary laser cannons. The secondary guns were a pair of repeating laser cannons attached to out-trigger arms, while the tertiary guns were two light anti-personnel laser cannons located at the front of the main cabin. Additionally, the AAT featured 6 launch tubes for energy shell artillery. These tubes fired physical shells that were cocooned in plasma, amplifying their destructive potential. AATs carried 3 types of shell: high energy shells, armor-piercing shells, and bunker buster shells. High-energy shells were the standard artillery used by the AAT, and were fired from the outermost launch tubes. They were intended for general anti-personnel and anti-vehicular use. The middle tubes on either side of the tank fired armor-piercing shells, which were slightly more powerful and intended to blow through even the toughest tank armor. The most powerful shells carried by the AAT were bunker busters, which were fired from the innermost launch tubes. These powerful high explosives could utterly annihilate enemy fortifications, though their use was limited by how few the tank could carry. Tank crews were largely sparing with how much they used their artillery, as the shells couldn't be reloaded while the tank was in action. For reloading, tanks would have to be returned to a Lucrehulk class battleship, where the entire foot section would be removed for servicing and replaced with a fully loaded one. The AAT was designed alongside the rest of the Trade Federation droid army, and so it worked well with the army's other craft. 114 of these tanks were carried aboard each C-9979 landing craft, while Lucrehulk class battleships could carry 6,250 of them in total. They were a crucial link in the Trade Federation's war machine, serving as relays between the droid army and command. Later, during the Clone Wars, AATs were also built into basic rank structure of the CIS droid army, as a squadron of 24 tanks were required to form a battalion, and 18 required to form a vanguard. All told, the AAT was a hell of a tank. It had a very flexible mission profile. It could be effectively used in open field battles, urban warfare, anti-infantry operations, anti-vehicular operations, guard duty, prolonged sieges, and even reconnaissance, albeit aggressive reconnaissance. These bad boys were definitely the most effective repulsor tanks in Galactic history, if not necessarily the most effective tanks overall, and they worked wonders for the Confederacy during the Clone Wars, as we'll discuss in a moment. Upon receiving its first deliveries of tanks, the Trade Federation put the first AATs through rigorous live fire testing prior to the Battle of Naboo. Armored assault tanks faced off against each other and against pirate bands in these harrowing tests, and they quickly proved to be every bit as effective as Bactoid had promised they would be. Once the rest of the army was ready, thousands of AATs were then deployed in the invasion of Naboo, where they led the charge in numerous skirmishes against the Naboo and the Gungans. In the Battle of the Great Grass Plains, they were initially thwarted by the Gungans' energy shields, but once droid infantry disabled those shields during the battle, AATs began annihilating the remnants of the Gungan Grand Army, pummeling Jar Jar and his comrades with laser cannon fire and energy shells. The AATs were disabled when the droid army was shut down during the battle, but they nonetheless proved themselves effective first. Following the Battle of Naboo, Bactoid Armor Workshop publicly and dramatically disbanded for its role in arming the Trade Federation. However, unbeknownst to most of the galaxy, this was really just a cover they used to move their operations underground. Bactoid secretly continued making armored assault tanks for the Trade Federation, and later for the other corporate factions that underwrote the Confederacy of Independent Systems. As a result, when the Clone Wars erupted in 22 BBY, armored assault tanks returned to the battlefield almost immediately, quickly becoming some of the most common separatist ground units. Over the course of the Clone Wars, AATs prominently appeared in battles from Thule and Christophsis to Ryloth and Geonosis to Annexus and Felucia. Time and time again, they proved to be the saving grace of the droid army. Their heavy armor was a welcome break from the flimsiness of many other separatist units. Their flexibility made them useful in virtually any battlefield situation, and their wide variety of powerful weapons made them a nightmare for Republic forces, even Republic forces that had ATTEs with them. For all these reasons, AATs became a favorite of separatist commanders, especially tactical droids and organic officers that liked to make use of the tank's open-hatched main turrets. They had their weaknesses, but no crippling flaws, and their sheer utility made up for their weaknesses anyway. There was virtually no battlefield scenario in which an AAT wouldn't prove useful, and in the eternally chaotic Clone Wars, that sort of reliability was invaluable. The Armored Assault Tank was the workhorse of the CIS droid army, and a workhorse that served its masters well. So that's our look at the Armored Assault Tanks, one of the best war machines in the Star Wars universe. But what do you think? Are there other Clone Wars era vehicles you'd like us to take a look at? Feel free to post your thoughts in the comments below.
And just before you run off to those suggested videos, guys, make sure you check out our all new channel, The Braved, where we post high quality content on a weekly basis that goes through all the eras of human history to handpick some of the most badass men and women existing in those eras. So if that sounds like it tickles your fancy, that's the first link in the description below. And if you just want to listen to some music, check out our Relax Jack channel, where we use a lot of the music posted there on the videos on this channel. And if you want access to exclusive content and a behind the scenes Discord where you can chat to myself and the team who make these videos, consider donating to the Patreon. And lastly, if you want to join our wider community, check us out in our Geetsly's Discord and our up and coming Geetsly's Gaming Network with our new Clone Wars roleplay server opening near the end of March. Anyways guys, as always, thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you in the next video.